certain conditions you have to meet in order to make it work. And one of them, I think, was like, it worked really well if you have PDF from Adobe Illustrator. And even with that, there was something like with interlacing. So basically, people said that they have really nice sharp graphics in the PDF, but after it got exported, it's kind of blurred. So I feel like this should be the target, like that Apple should be going forward. But for now, it seems like it's not there yet.
So you haven't seen SVG?
No, as far as I know, you cannot use SVG. At least the last time I checked. I haven't checked if this changed in, for example, Xcode 8, but for Xcode 7, I was also surprised that I cannot use vector format. So all the things that I had to use are PNG format, basically. So yeah, a bit of truth in terms of the design tools. All the tools that I've worked with seem slightly imperfect, other than the Inkscape, which doesn't have this problem. I think it saves actually its own project in the SVG format, and it reads the SVG, and then you can export it to SVG. But as I said, it was not very practical yet. So all the tools that I've worked with have binary formats, which is slightly it's not great, especially if you work with open source, because in the perfect case, if I use the tool and I commit the new version of my artwork in the GitHub diff, I would like to see what's changed. Like maybe I added a line, or I changed the color, or I added 2 strokes or something. With the binary format, I just cannot do this. And then I decided to do some usability tests. So I realized that asking people is pretty cool. So once I had a bit more of the prototype still on the paper, I went out and I asked some people. People are getting confused. A lot of people don't know what the usability test is. So if you ever try to go with your app or your prototype on paper or on the phone, I would suggest not to use any terms like usability test, or just tell them, okay, I'm working on a project, can you just test it for me? And use as simple vocabulary as possible. Otherwise, people are like, don't know what you want from them, especially if you work on the app like this, which is not like a customer-facing app. People cannot relate this app to any other app unless we explain them what it does and things like that. So a lot of people are like, I think I cannot help you. Like, I don't know what it's all about. And all I wanted them to do is basically, take my phone and see if they can go through the most common flow, which is 2 tabs on the screen. But the cool thing is that people who understood what I do and tested the app told me, okay, I think this is wrong, or I think this could be improved, or things like that, which was pretty neat. And the app, if you have a geeky app, yeah, it's kind of hard. So I feel like the easy app would be easier, and more complex app gets more harder to explain. Typically, when you grab the user and you want, they are in a rush and they have no business in helping you, convincing them to spend, 5 minutes to first understand what the app is all about, and then maybe next 5 minutes on testing it out, it's too much. I also tried bribing people with coffee, etc., and it also didn't work. So, before this presentation, I did this thing where I think most of all my usability tests I recorded. So as I was testing this on my paper prototype, I took the camera and I was basically shooting on the person's fingers and hands, and I tell them, what I want them to achieve, or first I explained them what the app does, and then I told them more or less what I would like them to achieve, and then they click through the paper prototype, and you can see what the end result is. Like, some people get confused, some people actually do pretty well. It's pretty cool to see. And I think I will plan to do it for my next projects. If I ever do something similar, doing usability tests is a great way to actually do some test driving. So now let's move to the implementation. As I said, I started from Android. Actually, Android is really nice. I won't concentrate much on Android because I dropped the Android version pretty early on, but I found Android Studio to be pretty good. It's fast for smaller projects, but as your project grows, it kind of gets sluggish. The thing is that Android IDE, this whole like editor, is actually a blend of the editor itself, the Java compiler, and something that is called Gradle, which is like a language that that sets the project up for you, and it's like a project compiler. It can do a lot of stuff for you, but it's also very slow. So for the bigger projects, I would really like Android Studio to like speed it up somehow, especially the Gradle part. If it could be like 3 or 5 times faster, this would be amazing, because for bigger projects, I find that I basically change one line and I hit compile, and it takes a long time, and I get distracted, and I open Hacker News, and then before I realize that I'm not doing what I'm supposed to be doing, it's 10 minutes. So yeah. Also, kind of weird is that the whole system is open source. The kernel that it runs on is open source, the libraries, but the IDE itself is not. Like, it's a commercial product based on JetBrains. It's a very good IDE. I don't blame them for picking this project, but it's kind of, it's counterintuitive. But in general, I liked it, I think. Gradle is open source. So now, if I were to compare, I would say it's win-win or lose-lose, or it's similar. IDEs. What's funny is that they use XML everywhere. In Android, it's not as much of a problem because it's actually meant to be that way. Like the way you are supposed to build UI, like one of the ways is to actually paste XML snippets. It's nice because this XML is documented, and you have examples and things like that. The problem with Xcode, on the other hand, is that the main project, the project that Xcode is spitting out, and like something that you will keep versioned in the version control, it's the XML that is basically undocumented. So you suddenly like modify something, you do git diff, and it has, let's say, 20 or 30 lines of changes that you don't know what they are. You basically don't really know what happened. So there is, in my opinion, there is too much of XML. So this is one of the examples. And the funny part is that it was my third commit to the Android version of the app. Was basically change that has been made for me, and I don't know what's going on. So you kind of start to feel like you are out of command and out of control. You basically see changes that you don't know what they are, which is super problematic. Now, open source good and bad parts. So let's move to this core topic of this talk. So what is good about open source? Like why I decided to do open source, and what I feel about why I think it's cool to have open source components. You get a lot of functionality. So both for Android and iOS, you have a lot of modules that you can just go and use, and it's all free. And by free, I mean you don't pay for it with money, but it's quite likely that you will pay with your time. So it's funny that most of the people, when they say, okay, open source is free, they don't realize that it's quite likely that the quality may be not on par with what you would get if it was the commercial product. Typically, people don't want to pay for open source components, so these authors and community doesn't really have a way to fund it. So next time you see a fundraiser, or next time you see that someone is raising money to get some features done, maybe consider donating $5 or $10, because in the grand scheme of things, if 1,000 people donate, suddenly this person can spend 1 month on actually improving the components. And this was also my experience. So a lot of stuff that I used is, I can read the code, I can compile it, I can integrate it with my app, but if something doesn't work too well, you run into trouble. And Sensorama is using 23 modules. So this kept growing and growing, and I realized that I wanted to follow this flow where if I know that something exists, I didn't want to reinvent it. And at some point it got out of control actually. I was trying to put too much stuff. So let's maybe talk about what I use right now. The way you go to GitHub and you will read the source code, or you look at the project, what kind of stuff I use. So first of all, when I started, I think one of the first modules and one of the first functionalities I wanted to have is some improvements in how I debug the app. And on Unix and Linux and desktop, it's pretty easy to understand when things are going wrong. Your program fails, it gets segmentation fault. In the command line, it's especially easy because you will understand that this program try to divide by 0 or it ran out of memory or something else. On mobile, it's harder because the effect of your bug will be basically your app will disappear from the screen, right? Now, good luck with debugging it without any feedback. Like, what does it mean? Did I make a mistake? Did the system make a mistake? Was it a resource allocation problem? Did I run out of memory? Like, you don't know what happened. So one of the solutions that I had is this cool product called Fabric. Right now, it's maintained by Twitter. I think in the past it was called Crashlytics. Right now, it's part of the same umbrella of projects called Fabric. The website is Fabric.io. I think Twitter just tries to attract developers to their ecosystem. All the stuff pretty much is free, so for anything that I talk here, I didn't pay. And what it is, it basically installs kind of like a monitor inside of your app. It's wired to the cloud that Twitter maintains for you. If your app crashes, it will obtain the stack trace, like what failed and where, and it will send it to the cloud. And the way it works is that the moment your app crashes, it will be crashed, but this report will be obtained and stored on the storage element on your phone. And the moment you start your phone once again, it will be uploaded to the cloud. And as a developer, you will see basically a report saying, okay, your app failed, this was the phone, this is how much memory was on the phone when the app crashed, and this is the stack trace. And this is very useful. I think I wouldn't have developed the app without this because some problems don't happen in the simulator, some problems happen on the device, and some app behavior is modified when you have the phone connected with the cable to your laptop, and when you don't have it connected to your laptop. And my recommendation is that if you try to debug stuff, try to use it as the user would. Basically try to release the app to your own phone and try to use it, play with it. And more likely, for a couple of first times, you will see crashes. So another thing that I wanted to have is I wanted to have some more interactive debugging. So once again, on desktop or even on web, in the web world, it's easy because you can have something like print statements and things are spitted out in the console, or you get output on in the log file. But the problem is, okay, on mobile, what do you do? And some people figured this out, that you can actually use, I believe this product is using Bonjour, this protocol within the local area network that lets two Apple devices connect with each other in an easy way. And what it does is basically it gives you the print statement, but over the air. So you start this as a module integrated in your app, and you have the receiver on your laptop. And as the app starts, all the print statements are sent to your laptop. You can basically get print functionality from the mobile device. Realm is also like a free database that guys who I think were somehow related with SQLite did. It's very fast, it's very nice, it's easy to use. You basically use it as a backend, as a database for your app. It has an ability to query your data set. You basically make the scheme of your data types, your data structures, and it's very nice. This is, I think, the piece of the whole app infrastructure that I had the least problems with. And it's nice because I picked it because it's available on Android and iOS. In the typical iOS world, normal way to do data model for your app is core data, which is Apple specific, and it's very, you have to write a lot of stuff to actually make it work. And this is very nice. So for example, when I release an app and I want to extend the, let's say that one of the data types in my app is called data file. So it will have the number of samples that I obtained, the time when I started recording, the time when I stopped, what kind of font the file has been recorded on, and this is my structure. And now, if I would like to add, let's say, size of the file, typically in core data it would be much harder, but in real there is a thing that is called migration. The app, when started, can detect if your data scheme in this new world has been updated, and if it did, it will take the existing data file on the phone and it will basically seamlessly add this additional data field. So it improves your updating workflow. If you have a user in the field and they update the app with the new data model, this thing actually makes handling this case pretty easy. I use AWS SDK for data storage. So the thing that I didn't tell you about is that not only you will get the data file, but I will also get your data file. So this is one of the things that I wanted to do is I wanted to keep improving the app as it is used. And one of the ideas that I had is that, as I send an email, I could CC myself, but that felt so-so, and I didn't know actually how many users would use the app. So I decided to use S3 as storage, and for this I'm using AWS SDK. And right now I'm on the free tier. It's also very nice, pretty good to have a feeling that if I need, I can scale it up, and it's pretty cool. And for authorization, I also read a couple of articles how people approach the problem of how do I log in my user? Basically, how do I make sure that my app is only used by people who logged in and people who I could potentially contact. So I started to explore. One of the ideas was to use Ruby on Rails or Go or Node.js and build a backend. But I realized that I have enough problems with the mobile part, so I didn't want to do the backend, at least at the beginning. So I went and I found this product called Auth0. This is the company that its sole business is to make the product for authenticating users. And they handle Android, iOS, web. So I decided to use them. And once again, everything free, everything open source. You can go read the code. They provide modules that you can integrate easily with your app, which is pretty cool. And in the next slides, I will show you how I got involved in open source community and contacted some guys when I had problems with and basically solved some issues. I use Mailgun for mailing, which is yet another free service, at least for certain tier of, if you send, I think below 5,000 emails a month, it's completely free. So if you ever need emailing from your app, you can use that too. Bzipping I mentioned, it's for compression. I use this. Another module also made by, I think, German company and some other consulting firm from somewhere. It's basically it seems like two guys open sourced a module that solves a big problem in an app, which is basically the setting screen. If you want to do it by yourself, you can probably do it, but there is things that you have to think about, for example, where do I save the settings that the user clicked? How do I make the settings look like other apps in the iOS ecosystem? What happens if I go to my settings, general app settings menu in the iOS? All these things that you could potentially develop by yourself, but there is no real reason because somebody already addressed this problem. So I used this module, for example, and everything was open source. So my recommendation, if you ever think about a problem, unless you do something super exotic, I think somebody already solved it. Pretty much all things that we see in modern apps are developed by open source projects or, sooner or later things that will become open source. So go on GitHub or GitLab or Bitbucket and try to search. And most of the time I really find great stuff. The problem that I run into is that sometimes, because the Xcode and Android Studio evolve, they keep updating the SDK, they keep updating the tools, the compiler is different. Some things, if they are not maintained well, they may not be very useful. But if you see that the author is active, and people keep submitting bugs and the bugs get fixed, it means that you can, more or less depend on this project. So I have two takes on this whole idea of using open source modules. First is that without this open source, I think the app development would be very hard, and I think the functionality would be not there yet. When I think about trying to develop all this stuff by myself, I think it would take much more time. So this is my first take. Another one is that if I used my own stuff, it would be more fun, and I think it could give me a bit more control, and I will explain a bit more what I mean by that in the next couple of slides. Yeah, it would definitely take more time, or not. And one of the speculations I make to myself very often is that I just wonder if once I get better, if I would actually be able to do more stuff by writing simple modules by myself and not dealing with communication, resolving problems, updating, making sure that I install correct version of the module. What happens if there is a bug and I happen to hit this bug? Do I fix it in my version of the code, or I try to solve it for everybody? Yeah. Take number 3 is that if you try to use open source, you better use it the way original author wanted. If you try to do something unexpected, it will probably lead to unexpected result, and you will kind of be on your own. Yeah. And the cool thing is that for all the stuff that I mentioned, there is pretty much zero cost, other than these design tools, which is design part of the talk, but for the development part of the talk, I didn't pay anything. So all the things that I got are completely free. People basically try to promote open source within their own companies. They, I think, try to target their products to developers, because a lot of traction you get by this trend of moving from the bottom up. Basically, our developers use something, they promote it to managers, managers to executives, and you can basically get customers that way. So a lot of these companies basically offer you free stuff, which is nice. On the one hand, it's nice, but I will also mention the negative sides. Yeah, so this thing I mentioned. When your app is open source, it's nice that also these companies that provide the infrastructure don't want to charge you money. And the nice thing about, for example, app like Sensorama is that it's fully open source, so I suddenly start to qualify for all these open source benefits. And the companies, for example, who have the continuous integration solutions, basically, box somewhere in the cloud, running the operating system that I need, that is synced up with the GitHub, suddenly I can use this because I qualify as an open source developer. So typically people pay and I don't pay, which is nice. JetBrains gave me the free license for their own products, because I'm an open source developer now. Everything what I did for Sensorama was open source. So if I wrote Ruby, I could write it in the RubyMine, their IDE for Ruby. Or I could develop, if I had to deal with the database, I could use this tool that they have called the data group, which connects to SQL database and gives you a nice UI, and things like that. So I found that this piece was pretty cool as well. Some lessons that I learned. So for open source modules in Xcode, or maybe let's back off. So on Android, you also have the Gradle that I mentioned about, the compiler for your project. In Android, Gradle takes care of dependencies and downloading modules and compiling the project. On iOS, it looks a bit different. Like Apple doesn't provide you this by default. So a lot of people, kind of had this idea. Let's get together and build the projects that help us install the modules and dependencies and open source components. And one of these solutions is something that is called CocoaPods. Free open source project, a lot of developers contributing together. There is an infrastructure based on GitHub, and basically every open source module author can submit their own module to CocoaPods repository, thanks to which other developers can use it in their app. Yeah. So this is how it more or less looks like. You have big search box, and you can type whatever you want, and you will get more answers than you need. You will get very often modules that have been abandoned, but some of the modules you will get that are active. And sometimes the problem is that you get the same functionality in 3 different modules, and your problem is basically which one to pick. So my advice, if you do this, is basically, once again, do your due diligence, go to GitHub or whichever project management tool they use, and try to see if this project is active, and if it's maintained, and if the quality of the code is good or not. Just open 3 random source code files and see if the author sticks to the style, and if the bugs get fixed on time, and things like that. So I think that CocoaPods is great. This is my first take on it. So basically, a lot of modules for free that mostly work. And there is a small hook about this stuff. So the way it works is ties to what I already mentioned, is that export project is an XML file. And the way that CocoaPods works is that it will actually try to do a lot of things for you, which is basically going and modifying this XML code and trying to like seamlessly tie whatever you want to include in your app into the project, resulting in divs that you cannot understand. It will basically try to like integrate you for free, but the end result is mostly it works, but if it doesn't, it's just out of control. So it's very hard to be in control and have this feeling that you understand what's going on. And once again, XML, unreadable and not documented. So I don't have anything against XML in general, but when someone uses it as a project language, it would be nice to have some brief understanding of like what certain values mean, or like what's the general structure, or what to look at, how can I validate this stuff. So my conclusion number 1 is that you need to use CocoaPods well, and if you think that you will just, most of the time you can just use it, but if you like use 3 or 4 modules, it starts to be interesting because all these modules that you want to use have dependencies. So you suddenly start to suck 200 megabytes of source code files and project files, and it gets out of control. So go and read the documentation. I really highly encourage you to spend a bit more time on this part, because it will save you a lot of time at the end. CocoaPods is Ruby. It's Ruby framework. So it has a pod file, which is just like a gem file. This is the file where you specify the module dependencies and versions and things that you want to include. So if you only can narrow down which version of the module you want to use, do it. The reason why is that if the version that you want is 1.2.3, it will never change. And if you say that you want module X and you don't specify a version, it will try to take whichever version is the most up to date, which is not great because some changes are, when you don't specify the version, you are basically, you depend on the author of this module doing the correct thing, which is, sticking to this versioning scheme and making sure that he didn't break the previous functionality, which sometimes is not true and it leads to problems. And it adds a lot of more complexity to your project. So you depend on the network, GitHub, other people repositories. If you develop your stuff in the coffee house and you have tethered internet, CocoaPods is not great because it will try to do weird stuff like update its own repo and do git clone or do git pull, and it will take a lot of time and a lot of bandwidth. So conclusion number 1 is that once it works, it will take a lot of files from the internet and put it in the local directory of your app. My opinion is that you should commit it. And the reason why is that at least you will see what is there. Of course, the first time you do it, you won't be able to analyze. Basically the problem is like which 100,000 lines of code I look at, right? There is no way you're going to analyze it. But the thing is that when you update, these changes that authors made to their modules are small enough that you can actually read through them and understand them most of the time. Yeah, that's what I said. A lot of the things downloaded from the internet. Some modules are ginormous. That's the problem that I face. So for example, like AWS module, the SDK, it has all the products that Amazon supports, they have in one module. So when you update, you cannot analyze it. It's just so many lines that there is no way I'm going to read through it. So the conclusion number 3, if you haven't yet started using your app, or you would like to have something that maybe doesn't have as many modules but is more, it's nicer for development, there is a project called Cartridge. It's nice because it builds the binary framework for you, and you have to later take this framework file and include it in your project by hand. So at the integration time, there is a bit more work, but at the end, I feel like the maintenance and spending time on resolving all these Ruby issues and CocoaPods issues, I feel like there will be time saving here. So if you can only use this project, it's a bit better. So I think my next project will be based on this stuff. And as I said, most of the stuff just worked. Most of the stuff sometimes works. So you download it and suddenly you realize that something that should just work doesn't, and you go and you dig, and typically it's basically the amount of time you spend and looking through GitHub issues and trying to read through the documentation and trying to understand what is being said and what the author actually meant, stuff like that. So for example, I will give you an example of where including the module was not great. So the first version I built was for Android, and one of the things that I wanted to do is basically store files. And there was this great product made by Facebook called Parse, which was basically like a mobile backend with file storage, with key value database, everything synchronized, everything stored on the cloud, and your code in the app was minimal. And then Facebook shortly after announced that they will shut it down. So suddenly I realized that 2 or 3 weeks of like integrating it in my app and trying to make sure that it all works, went nowhere. The service would be shut down, so I had to take it out of Parse, and it was a bit upsetting. Another thing is like Travis CI, this integration service that I mentioned about. It's free, it's nice, but stuff on it changes very often. So they update the base image of the computer that they have, and sometimes the flow that you have used to work yesterday but doesn't work today anymore. And sometimes it's very slow. So I don't blame these guys at all. This service is great. It's just the fact of life that whatever they provide to open source guys, maybe it's not as fast as it would be if you paid. And a lot of stuff that you include suddenly starts to be like a dependency, so you have to keep monitoring it. Like you will have to be subscribed to the mailing list, because if they do some maintenance or they want to change something, you better know about it up front, because otherwise you may wake up without your users being able to log in, for example. And I call it the failure chain. So you have so many like modules right now. If any of these modules that I have in my app would kind of change or break, I will stay without a project that builds. And actually this happens very often. So for example, one of the modules that I have shows up like a pop-up icon when you basically like hit record, hit stop. There is like an icon that shows up saying, I'm exporting this file to the cloud right now, or if you are not on Wi-Fi, it will tell you, you are not on Wi-Fi, I won't export. There is like a separate module for this, which is great, but it's not great if your Xcode is upgraded and your Swift version switches from 2.3 to 3.0, and suddenly you realize that this module doesn't even compile. And you have to go and do some digging, and there is a question of whether you fix it for yourself or you try to bring this change for everybody and contribute it back. So be prepared for a lot of documentation. So conclusion number 5, try to update only when you really have to. Updates is when most of my issues happened, I think. And I've noticed that it's easier to get help from people who have a product, like the company Auth0, the authentication product. You know, this is their bread and butter. This is how they make their money. So the moment I submit a bug, they really treat it seriously. So I get attention from the developers or people who write documentation. So I find it very nice. Even though with open source people who, if you show enough motivation and you show them that you did your homework and you provide enough details, like what your problem is and how you try to solve it and what issues you still have, they also are pretty responsive. So I cannot say a bad word about my experiences, at least here. And sometimes it's harder, like for some projects I've noticed that they get abandoned and people get bored or they've moved on and things like that. So as I said before, you have to do enough due diligence. How to communicate with people in the open source community. So as I said, be prepared to do some digging. Make sure that you have searched through Google and Stack Overflow and GitHub issues. This is one of the examples that I had. I believe it's CocoaPod's problem. Nice thing about how they do it is right now GitHub gives them a way to show me the template of what they want to see in my bug report. So the moment you create the moment you hit new issue submission, you will get a pre-filed template, and I just file it in. Not all projects have that, so sometimes you just have to do it for yourself. Like mention your Mac, your computer version, your Mac version, your operating system version, your Ruby version, all possible stuff that you can. I would suggest to include because it saves the developer a lot of time up front. And remember, most of the people there are volunteers, so try to be polite and not rude, and some of them do it in their free time and don't get paid, so it's sometimes frustrating, and I had a lot of moments where I was really upset that something doesn't work, especially if it worked like yesterday and doesn't work anymore today. But I still remember that these guys are basically doing it in their free time. So this is the amount, I think, of problems that I hit. Like, some stuff just didn't work. So you file a bug report, and some of the bug reports here, I think, are not filed by me. Like, I think this one. But I searched with my username, and it means that I probably replied there that, yeah, I'm hitting the same bug. Which is very important in my opinion, because sometimes I see a situation where someone tried to use an open source module. They cloned the CocoaPods, they tried to integrate it in the app, and they had some issue. And the author of the module says, I'm not hitting this issue. There is no problem. And it's like all the engineers, reply, it works for me, right? But when you see that suddenly the issue ticket has 15 thumbs up, that other people hit this problem too, and people keep replying that, yeah, I'm hitting that too, and give conditions, this is very helpful for the author. So please report bugs and documentation problems if you can. This is another issue in this authorization plugin. I used their pop-up, I had some problems, so I reported that. Then I had another problem, then I had another problem, and they are pretty responsive about this stuff. Talk to people. So, for example, here I try to add this Travis continuous integration solution to this module that I used called in-app settings. So I talked through, first I talked to, at the beginning of the issue, I make sure that, the person knows what I'm trying to achieve, and etc., etc. And, sometimes you just get a reply which will lead you to feel that you've done or wasted your time, but don't feel bad about it, because some people don't have enough time to actually support you. So don't feel discouraged by that. I feel like sooner or later we will include this work, which is not included yet. Yeah, a whole bunch of issues basically. And yet another thing, I don't even remember about some issue somewhere, I think AWS pods. help with sample code. Like this settings module was kind of interesting. I wanted to have it, but it didn't have easy use case, like in terms of the sample code. I couldn't figure out how to use it in the Xcode project, in which I used storyboards, this UI-based interface generator. So I had to spend additional week or two to figure out what's going on and how I can make it work, and I asked questions, etc., etc. And finally, I decided, okay, how about I, instead of bugging the author, how about I make a branch, create an app, put as much knowledge in the code as I can, or I feel once I think I'm done with my homework, and I submitted it, and this is what happened. Like, it was not perfect, but as you see, the main author of this library helped me out a bit, even without asking me. He just took this pull request, modified it how he felt is the right way, and suddenly this module became better because right now we have a sample code for this project. There is some more stuff that I contributed to it. I really wanted to have this module, so I kept working on it. How to deal with other issues is trying stuff until it works, copying and pasting from Stack Overflow, and Googling error messages. And this is like, it looks funny, but most of the mistakes and errors and problems we solve it most of the time that way. If there is a documentation, sometimes you don't have documentation. So quickly, bad stuff. Some stuff is like temporary workaround that has been left there and is not fixed. Some things I think were meant to be read or written by people working in a certain company. There is like little explanation in the code what certain things are doing. So yeah, once again, do your homework, read the code. It's also nice to if you see that you read documentation, you feel like you have done your work, you more or less understand what the author meant and wanted to say, and you feel like you still don't get the functionality you want, you just ask. And it's also like a big time saver. Open source is a lot of work, I must say. As I say, I underestimated the amount of time I would be spending on Sensorama. It was a lot of sleepless nights and evenings and weekends, etc., etc. And it's still a relatively simple app. So I try to automate as much as possible the design part I talked about. The thing that I would like to point out is that there is this great tool called Fastlane. Once again, it's a Ruby ecosystem, so you have to be really careful about which versions of this tool you use. What it does for you is basically it connects to the Apple API and does it in a completely non-interactive way. You can do it entirely from the command line. It has its own configuration file called fast file. It's actually supported by Facebook, by Twitter as well. They have a very active ecosystem, and the amount of work that they put there is it's ridiculous. But it's still I would say it's early on, but it's very functional already. And what it does for you is basically it builds your project. It can do a lot of things around your project, like submit, build reports, and package the app, and export the assets. And it can also submit the app to this Crashlytics beta testing service that I mentioned, and can submit the app to Apple Store for you entirely from within one command line. Of course, you will have to spend some time on reading how to do it, what the format of this file is, how you want to have it structured. But if you visit Sensorama GitHub page, you will see that I use it. So there is already build.sh script that already has this automation there. Yeah, single command deploy, very nice. Be careful about Ruby. I feel like open source is a bit harder than not open source project, because in closed source you can hack and do really nasty stuff, and nobody will ever see this. People will only see the outcome, and once the app is nice and flashy, nobody will care about the code. Most of the users don't even know what the code is. But if you develop something open source, you cannot really do a lot of hacks. You can do some hacks and people will understand that you were dealing with time constraints and workarounds, but you try to reach some level of quality. So yeah, others are looking. So I assume that whoever will see this video, or you guys will at some point may want to go and check it out. And if the app is total crap, it will mean bad about me. So I try to make it as good as possible. And probably everybody who does open source does it that way. People try to push the quality as far as possible. And it's pretty easy to get confidential stuff open sourced. You have to be really careful about that. API keys are something that you can, do a lot of you have a lot of problems with, and you can humiliate yourself pretty badly. So up to this point, I think I did it twice, and regenerating the API keys for some services is a pain. I could do it because I didn't have users. At this point, if I had a user and I would have to switch the API keys, users basically get punished. App stops working and they basically are forced to update, which is terrible. So make sure that you don't publish too much. And yeah, some stuff is unexpected breakages. So for example, before this presentation, I really wanted to have Travis build my project and show you guys the green status bar and showing the app building, but unfortunately I didn't manage to do this. Travis is very picky about certain stuff, and there are some problems that I just didn't have time to fix. And once again, it's kind of like CocoaPods / Ruby / iOS / Mac ecosystem that has to come together at the correct time, and it didn't happen. Another cool example of the breakage that you won't predict is, for example, when iOS 10 showed up, Apple added this feature called double factor authentication. So if you want to install an app, you will try to Apple will try to confirm if you really want to install this app on your phone by asking you to type the code, like a single use code on your keypad. And suddenly I was like, okay, that's cool, I like it, it's more secure. So I enabled it, and then I was working on Sensorama for this presentation, and I tried to build it, and suddenly I got a report. Someone from Texas is trying to use your Apple ID. We recommend that you change the password. And I was like, that's weird. So of course, I went right away and changed the password. And then I realized that Travis is basically cloud service, and their servers are not in California, they are in Texas. And the Fastlane tools, which are automation tools, are trying to connect to Apple Store, and they are trying to, upload the upgraded version of Sensorama. And of course, this is using my Apple ID. And suddenly you kind of connect the dots, and you realize, okay, I did something that I shouldn't, right? So lessons learned was, it's very hard sometimes to connect the dots when something breaks. Another thing that you may want to do if you want to design an app and publish it is try not to use your personal Apple ID. Register yourself separate. Like when you apply for the developer program, when you have this page where they try to charge $99 for the Apple developer program, try to create yourself a new Apple ID and have it completely separate for your app, because it helps a lot. Because the Apple ID is something that is basically public on the Travis logs.
You can actually have more than one account that can upload to the same.
Oh.
Yeah.
So
you can actually create an Apple ID and give it permissions and use it only for that for Fastlane.
Oh, okay.
So that's all that.
Oh, okay. So I think I have to talk to you because I will probably try to do it.
I haven't done it in a while. Just remember that you got an area where you can set up users like items.
That's cool. Okay, I didn't know it. So just for the purposes of the recording, I got a suggestion that there is a way to basically create yourself some sort of an additional association with additional Apple ID and have the the more fine-grained permissions and let this Apple ID only do certain things, such as upgrading the app in the Apple Store. So yeah, this is super cool. I think I will check it out. Okay, quick summary. If you like the presentation and if you like the app, you can go on GitHub and start it. The app still needs a bit more work. If I have some time in the shutdown during the December, I will try to push it towards like a really good quality, and I will try to have my spot and prime time Hacker News and Product Hunt. And I think that's all for what I wanted to tell you. Thanks a lot, and you can feel free to ask questions. Yeah.
How do you pronounce your name?
It's Wojtek. It's nowhere near how you spell it, but it's like Wojtek.
Alright.
Yeah, it's a Polish name. This is what happens when your parents never expected that you will leave the country. Yeah.
So the in-app settings module that you used,
Yeah.
Does it take care of the permissions as well?
So the settings screen is basically nothing else but the view with flip switches, with text fields, with all sorts of things that you typically see in the settings screen of the app. And it takes care of the memorizing it, and it provides you a way to provide the defaults. It has a cool feature of using like a native storage format on iOS called plist. So it will store the data there, which is very nice because some other modules use this plist, the functionality which I actually take advantage of. And one of the things that I use it for example, is if I publish the app somewhere and I will realize that tons of people want to play with it and store a lot of data or do something malicious, I have another module which can basically prevent people from saving files when I decide. So the way I do it is that in the app, when the app starts, it actually polls the file on my server, and this file has a setting, okay, users are permitted to store the files. If I flip it to no, the plist will get reflected, and this in-app settings module actually sees this. So, but there is no permission, no permission management there. So the permission management actually happens in the main Xcode project, where you have to toggle things such as, I want to have an access to sensors. So when you use Sensor App the first time, you will get this pop-up, hey, this app wants to use sensors for motion control, da da da, do you let it? And you will have to tap yes. So it's mostly like a storage memory with nice UI that you get for free. Okay, so I will be available, so if you guys come up with any other questions or suggestions, feel free. Thanks a lot, and hope to have, I hope you guys make your own open source contributions, and I will see some comments coming from you, and feel free to shoot me an email if you do so. Thanks a lot.
Awesome. We'll quickly switch. My presentation is short, and we are running short of time, but I'll finish it on time, no problem. How long did it take you to build the project? When did you start?
It's funny, it's actually started, the original version I started August 2015. It was Android. I worked on it, nights and weekends for 3 months, I think. And then I realized that I would like to get better at iOS, so I switched to iOS.
Wow.
I got a friend of mine an iOS device, and this is when we started to cross-test this stuff. And then, on and off for a couple of months. So I don't know how much full-time, but in terms of part-time, weekend work, it was a couple of months.
Wow, that's great. That's great. This dedication right there.
Yes.
That's awesome. And it paid off. Now,
Yeah.
isn't that one of the ways people who are new and they want to learn new skills, or they want to, let's say somebody want to become an iOS developer, create something, put something out there?
Yeah, I think building a project is really great because, first of all, as I said, when you read the book and you don't type this code and you don't feel the pain of seeing compiler error messages and actually figuring out what real things are all about, you don't actually learn. When you go through this painful process, you start to realize that you are more and more comfortable. You can, be more courageous and adventurous, and you can do more stuff. So I feel like I would highly recommend building stuff like Sensorama, open
Yes.
source.
Absolutely, absolutely, and I'm sure everybody realizes that, and that's why you guys are here.
Yeah.
And with that, I'm gonna start off
Thanks.